Okay. All right. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to take a image, a raw image, and you're going to see my workflow. And we're just going to go through and we'll open it up, and it'll look very familiar to you at first because it's the same as what if you're used to Lightroom, then you'll see what's going on. So I'm going to share my screen, and if everybody can I'm not going to share my screen yet because my app closed. I guess when I unplugged things, it closed. So let me get that set up again. Sorry about that. Let's see. Okay, now I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So you should be able to see my screen. Can I get an affirmative if you can see it?
We can see it.
You know, I can't hear anyone on the other side. Boyd,
Okay.
could you give me a 1, 2, 3 test or something?
This is Betty. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's not, I can't hear anybody, which is not going to be helpful. I assume you can hear me. Let's see. Betty, could you say something? Unmute and say something.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can't hear anybody. This is
Can you hear
pretty
me?
crazy.
No?
I restarted my computer earlier today and then just prepared to make sure it was nice and clean and ready. And of course, it's messing with me. How about now? Betty, could you give me a 1, 2, 3?
Okay, can you hear me now? 1, 2, 3.
I can hear you now. Thank goodness.
Okay.
All right. So we will now begin. All right. Let's see. Is my screen shared? Yes, it is. Okay. So just before we go too far, these are my images of a ballerina that many of you have seen before that I've submitted in the past. And I typically shoot.
You weren't there.
Pat, we can hear you. You want to mute? Okay. So typically I shoot just a stop darker than what I'm going to finally use. And that's sometimes I never shoot lighter. I've heard several photographers say that they shoot lighter, but I think that's an error because if you blow something out, you can't bring it back. If it's darker, you can bring back those, even the shadows and the highlights. So I don't understand when they say shoot a little an f-stop lower than what you want, but I would shoot an f-stop higher than what I want to make it a little darker. So I'm going to open up this file. This is a raw file. And it's going to open up in Photoshop. And can you see my Photoshop raw file?
We can see all of your images as
Oh.
JPEGs, as NAFs, and
Okay. I have to stop sharing and share a different screen then, I guess.
okay.
Let's do that. It is not showing camera raw, which is what I wanted to show. So when I clicked on that image, it opened up camera raw. And I don't have a way to show you camera raw if it's not going to do that. Well, I learned something new about Zoom. So I'm going to go ahead and just open it in Photoshop, and I will go back to camera raw and we'll go backwards. But that's not the way I would normally do things. So just to let you know. So I'm going to go to Photoshop and I'll share that. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, with the colored background and the ballerina in mid-flight.
There you go. Okay. So this is actually, I guess all I do is click on Photoshop. It would not show up in my shared screens, the raw, but this is the raw file. So, all right. So now I'm going to walk you through the things that I would do differently, or the things I would do when it's in raw. And first thing that I would do is, since I shot purposely to underexpose a little, I'm going to bring that exposure up a little bit. And I usually test contrast, but I don't know if I want any contrast here. I don't think I do. So I'm going to leave contrast alone.
Jessie, hey baby girl.
Pat, we can hear you if you do.
Sorry.
Yep. Okay, highlights. Since she's got a really strong white dress there, which is fine, but I'm going to see if it'll knock down that highlight a little bit. And when it does that, take a look at what it does to the dress. I'm going to make it a little bigger. Or the tutu, I guess, is the technical term. I'm going to reduce highlights, and it's going to make it a little more translucent. If you can see, it's taking away some of the white, and it's making it a little translucent. I will bring it down a little bit, and this is all personal taste. And I'm going to look at shadows. I'm going to open up the shadows a little bit for her face. And whites, I will bring those down a little bit as well. And blacks, I'll take some out of that just for her face. Okay. And then texture and clarity. I used to always use texture and clarity just to give it a little bit of boost, but I'm going to use just a tiny bit because I'm going to go down here in detail, because now there's a noise reduction. So it only works on raw files. So when you're in the raw, in Lightroom or Photoshop, it's exactly the same. You can use the denoise tool. And if you know who Matt Konkowski or whatever his last name is, who does a lot of the seminars on Photoshop and Lightroom online, he says that he thinks it's better than Topaz. This is new. This has only been around for a few months. And so I'm going to just click the denoise and see what it does. And I'm going to look at her face if I can find it. I don't know where I am on the image right now. Come on. She's in here somewhere. I don't know how to make this view smaller. Oh, I guess I do. So that was a control plus is what I used, or control minus actually. And now I'll see if I can, if it'll let me do a control. Oh, here we go. There's a minus there. Ah, well, that doesn't really help me, does it? There's the floor. There she is. There's her foot. Anyway, obviously I want to see her face. And actually it looks nice. That's the denoise worked nicely. I had it at 69. I probably would not go higher than that just because I don't think that's usually worth doing. And then you click enhance and it saves as a new file. Okay. So that's under detail. If you need a denoise tool, and keep in mind that one thing that's kind of unknown in the world of rules for competition is I'm sure a lot of people are using denoise because it's very difficult to tell if someone used denoise. And because of that, I feel like it should be accepted, but it is not one of those tools in the rules anyway that is accepted in, for instance, nature or PJ. You can't use it there. You could use it if you're doing color pictorial, which is what I entered my ballerina in.
Eric, why can you not use denoise in nature or other? What is it
Because-
that does, what is it that it does that makes it artificial?
Well, what they're claiming is that it's not exactly how the scene was viewed originally. And if you had taken, if you had gotten that capture on a tripod in a perfect situation, it should be clearer, crisper, and you wouldn't need denoise. But like I said, it's kind of one of those gray areas that is lost in translation here. And we're currently reviewing the PSA rules and to determine whether or not we think we can just put that in our rules to allow that. So it's going to be very interesting this next year in general because of AI. Denoise is technically AI, right? It's not something you're doing. It's you're clicking a button and it's happening on your computer, or it's happening on the website, on a website in the cloud. So there's going to be a lot of questions about things.
So what does it do? Does it make it crisper? Does it make it sharper? Does it make it?
Oh, you've never used it before?
No.
Oh, yes. So if anything was slightly out of focus, it can't be vastly out of focus, but if it was slightly out of focus, it's going to improve your apparent focus. It's going to crisp things up a little bit and make it tighter. And the skin will be a little smoother in a person. You often see it in bird photography where they're trying to get that eye perfectly, sharp. And that's what it's all about. And
So it's not really noise like in night photography where your sky is all noisy.
it can be that too, yes. It'll take clouds and make them smoother, but you get that effect just like when you're sharpening something. If you use the texture and where was I here? If I'm using texture and back in the basic side, texture and clarity, it's going to sharpen things up. The texture is going to smooth things out. And that's essentially what denoise is doing. But it would do that for clouds, like you were saying, if you're doing a night scene and there was artifacts in the sky, it would smooth those out for you.
Okay,
All right, so I've made a few adjustments here. I'm going to go ahead and look at a couple of other things under optics. I don't know if you use this, but the important thing are these two boxes up here: remove chromatic aberration and use profile corrections. So if your system knows your camera, what camera you're using, then it will automatically adjust. Did you see what it did there? I'll take them off and then turn them back on. It's going to make the image slightly larger, and it's going to remove any curvature that was in the image because of the lens. So I have a little profile in there that knows what lens I'm using, and then it makes adjustments for it. Down below here, there's defringe. I don't use them because I don't have any defringing to do in my images. Do you guys know what defringing is, or the purple fringe that appears on the edge of something when you blow it up sometimes?
yeah,
Okay. So that's where you would use this tool to reduce that. But in this particular lens and this particular camera, I don't have any issues with that. Okay. So I've used optics, and I don't need to do any other effects. I will show you guys one just for the heck of it. And I'm going to make it a little smaller. And if you don't use this, Bernie loves vignettes on images. Ansel Adams loved vignettes on images, and it often enhances the image. So if you take the vignette and you pull it down to the left, it's going to darken the edges. And that brings your focus point into our ballerina. And it shouldn't be affecting her, it should just be affecting the edges. And I heard a judge about a couple of months ago say that they didn't like vignettes, but a lot of judges do like vignettes. So that's just going to be a personal preference for yourself, and try it out to see if you think it's good for you or not good for you. All righty, so that's vignette. I'm going to just put a little bit of vignette. I'll probably end up cropping this whole thing anyway, but for now, let's leave it right there. And now I'm ready to open my image. And once I open the image, it's going to automatically open it in Photoshop.
so these adjustments are only made in Camera Raw. Are they available in, I never use Camera Raw. So,
Well, actually you do. If you use Lightroom Develop tool,
right, I use Lightroom and Photoshop, but I never go into Camera Raw like you did.
you didn't know you did, but the Develop module is Camera Raw.
Oh, so it's pretty much the same. It has the same denoise and stuff like that.
All exactly the same.
Okay,
And I can get it to it in Photoshop. If I'm in Photoshop, I can go up to Filter, Camera Raw, and I can choose that, and it'll take me back to, if I was in Lightroom, take me back to the Develop module. If I'm in Photoshop, it's going to take me to Camera Raw in Photoshop, but it's the exact same tool in both Lightroom and Photoshop. All right, so now I have my person, and I'm going to fine tune a few things. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to crop this just to make the file a little smaller, easier to work with. and I don't need a lot of this. So if you notice, I'll do this. I'm using the rectangular marquee tool to do my cropping. I don't use the crop tool because in using the crop tool, it's got a grid. You have to pull it from 4 sides. You have to do a few things. And I want to do it with my eye. So I take this marquee tool. It's a marquee selection tool. And I'm going to make that about where I want to crop it. And then I'm going to do image crop. And now I just have the part that I want to work with. Now, something that immediately comes to your eye is that that pole that had a sign on it, she's in front of the sign, but that pole is in a very unfortunate place. So I'm going to have to clone out that pole, maybe, or with the new Photoshop. If you haven't downloaded or updated your Photoshop, 2024 came out last week, end of last week. And one of the things it did is it integrated the generate tool, which is an AI function. And it may be something where they say we can't use that because it's AI in competitions. Once again, in nature, travel, and PJ, the other categories you can use it. So I'm going to show you what to do. So I'm going to use my marquee tool again here. There are some things written on the wall that I want to get rid of. So I'm going to grab this and let's see how good of a job it does, the AI does in performing. So I'm going to go to Edit, Generative Fill, and hit Generate. And I don't have to type anything in here. That's only if I wanted to add something to the image. If I wanted to add a rock or something down there, I would have to describe it. But if I just wanted to look at the surrounding area and come up with a good patch, then I just hit Generate. It's generating up here. It's going to give me variations, which it's starting to do down here. But usually the first one on something like, I haven't tried this, so I'm just, it just came out last week, so it did an okay job. It's not quite perfect, but it didn't do too badly. So I'm going to accept that. And the one thing that it's not perfect, let's just see how it looks when I blow it up. This little area right here kind of bugged me that it didn't quite work well. This wall is so confusing to look at in the first place that it probably isn't really going to make much of a difference and no one's going to know. But since I know, the way I would fix that is I would go to the background layer, because where that patch is now on a new layer. So I go to the background layer, I click on the 2 layers. I'm going to just merge those. Oops, it won't let me because I had the layer locked. Okay, so now I'm going to merge these 2 layers. Oops. And I'm going to merge the layers. Okay, so now I'm going to take my clone tool over here. And I'm just going to take a size that makes sense to me about this is good size, because what I'm going to do is clone some of this and bring it down this way. Now, if I did it at 100%, so you have to look at the options up here. My opacity is at 100% right now. If I reduce that down to 60, 65%, somewhere in there, and then I take this and clone that down this way, it should blend it pretty well. And I know that from experience. So let's make sure I'm not a liar. Yeah. So that red streak is a little less perfect. So I'm going to take that. And see if I can line it up a little better. Okay. So that bothers me less now, so that's okay. So all that's gone. I can do the same thing for the pole, except I have to be very careful. So I'm going to come up to this pole, and I will do a loose version because her dress is pretty important, or her tutu, sorry. And it's got some things going up inside of it, so I need to be more careful. But I'm going to go back to the same tool, Edit, Generative Fill, and hit Generate. And we'll see what it does. Did okay. I'm happy with that. So what you'll find is this will become a go-to tool for anything you're working on that is not in restricted categories of PJ, nature, and travel, because you're not technically supposed to take anything out. So if this was in nature and you had a stop sign that a raccoon was running across the road and you want to take the stop sign out, technically you're not allowed to. And I would say, if I was judging, that you shouldn't have a stop sign in there in the first place, because how much nature is that? The hand of man is too apparent, I guess. All right, so now I'm going to go to the clone tool. And I am going to clone some of this material down here and put it in here where that post was. But before I do that, I will probably just bring up some, and I'm going to do more opacity with the clone tool. And then I'm going to move it up here. Oops. I forgot I had a generative fill in there, so I have to merge these together again. Okay, now it'll let me clone. Okay. So this gray area here, once again, no one's really going to know that that's there, but I will. So since I will, I'm going to try to find an area, because this is kind of brown tones in here, of overlap that has brown tones in the dress. And I'm not really seeing much of that, except for her tights that she's wearing. I'm going to try this area. And I'm going to come back here. And I'm going to paint that. I'm going to do it twice. Once for the right-hand side, once for the left-hand side. Now that looks a little too dark to me. I'm going to be very picky. So it looks a little dark to me. So I'm going to go ahead and take my dodge tool. And I'm going to lighten it up. So dodging and burning, just like the old darkroom days. You can do the same thing. So I'm going to take the dodge tool, which will lighten it up a little bit. And just trying to get it so that it doesn't stand out to me anyway. And when I did that, I overlapped the area that I cloned before, so I'm going to need to touch that up a little bit. Okay. So I'm satisfied with that. There's a little piece of the pole down here, it looks like. So I'm on the clone tool. I'm going to bring my opacity all the way up to 100%. And I will clone this little piece. Okay. So something else I would do is, once again, the clone, or excuse me, the dodge and burn tool. I'm going to use the dodge tool. Get a little larger. And the hardness, what that means is actually, if it's to the left, it means it's softness. It's very soft there. You have to go all the way up here to be 100% hardness. And what does that mean? That means the edges of when you do something are going to be very soft and subtle. And if you bring that hardness way up, they're going to be very harsh and not what you want, and especially in a person's face. So I'm on the dodge tool. Let's just double check. Yep. So you can just click on this, and that's the dodge tool. There's a burn tool underneath there, and a sponge tool, which I don't think I've ever used a sponge tool. So if you would love to use that sponge tool, go experiment with it. All right, so the dodge tool. What I'm going to use that for is to enhance her face a little bit, and perhaps her neck too. So up here, we start getting into shadows. So you always have to choose your tool and then look at the options, which are this top bar. If you haven't seen some of my other sessions early on, we talk about these are the tools, these are the options, the top panels, and over here are panels to the right. And those are the three basic elements of Photoshop. So we're going to start with the tool. So I picked the dodge tool. Then you have to look at the options. So I'm going to choose mid-tones, and she may need some shadow tones too, but I'm going to start with mid-tones. And the exposure is 19%. And that is a good number to start with. It's not a high effect of midtones. It's just a little bit, and that's just fine. I'm going to make it 11. If you made it high, it would make the tool that I'm using to dodge, it would make white streaks on her skin, and we don't want that. So we'll start with 11%. We'll see what that does. And it's going to be subtle, but it's going to give a little more light in the shadows. And I think I don't want that much on her jawline, so I'm going to take that off. So you can see is that showing up well enough across the zoom?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to go back, and I am going to take it down to like 6%. And I'm just going to paint a little bit here. I just want to subtly reduce the amount of shadow with the dodge tool. You can also use the burn tool, and we can increase some shadow. So I can increase her jawline right here if I want to. And I think that has some possibilities, so I'm going to leave that in enhanced. And her neck, if I wanted to do a little bit to it. Now, I'm sorry I didn't do this, but normally I would duplicate the first layer before I do anything and work on the duplicate, because now I can go back and show you what it looks like, but we'll have to go back to the original raw file, but that's okay. So something you might notice is that she is not perfectly sharp. And why isn't she perfectly sharp? Is because I did not have my speed up high enough. I had 600 was my speed, a 600th of a second, and I later changed in different images I took to 800, and those came out much better. So the difference between that is her movement. This is catching a little bit of softness because of her movement. And as you can see, the back wall, which wasn't moving, that's sharp. So what that tells me is that I'm going to try my sharpen tool. So there's a sharpen tool right here for spot sharpening. And that's a very big spot sharpen. I don't want that. And I can bring the hardness down. I don't need it to be really hard. And then I'm going to do her eyes, the bridge of her nose, and her lips. And that may be pretty difficult to see, but it's doing a decent job of sharpening her. And I'm just going to do a little bit here and there. And she looks pretty good. So I've removed a few things. That generative fill tool, you're going to like that tool, by the way. One thing I can show you again on the generative fill is, so you look at the bottom, remember there were wood chips down there. And when I cropped it, there's still a few wood chips. So I'm going to go ahead and take this marquee tool. I'm going to select the bottom area, and you can select as much as you want. I wouldn't go into the ballerina, but you can select as much as you want, and it'll only use what it needs. And then I'm going to do edit, generative fill, generate, and it should get rid of those few little wood chips down at the bottom. So don't be afraid to ask questions at any point. Okay. That didn't do too badly. Now, I might have been smarter if I had just taken a little slice of it where the wood chips were and do generative fill maybe 3 times. But if you look over here on the right-hand side, you can see it makes a new layer. So once again, I have to select both layers, which is, I just hit on a PC Control or Command on a Mac to select both layers. And then I'm going to merge the layers.
Why do you keep merging the layers?
I have to merge layers because when you use generative fill, it automatically creates a separate layer of that fill that it just made. And I have to bring them back so that it's one unit so I can affect changes to it.
Ah,
You can't make changes to just the generative fill layer. You have to make the changes to the whole image or part of the image, but you have to merge them together. Okay. That's pretty good. And that's something I could submit if I wanted to. So typically what I do is I also blow it way up and I look for flaws. In this case, can you see that she has a scar on her arm? Right here?
yeah.
And I'm going to fix that scar with the spot healing brush. If you're not familiar with this, I think there's a similar tool in Lightroom. I'm not I'm not a huge Lightroom person, by the way. I know some of it, but I don't spend much time in it since I know Photoshop so well. But all you do is you pick a size, and the hardness should always be fairly soft. And I'm going to choose 0 in this case because she's not 100% sharp. And then I'm going to paint on top of it and then let go. And that scar is gone. It matched her skin tones. It did it all. And believe it or not, a lot of these tools that we use these days, technically they're all AI. We're not doing all this Photoshop stuff that we can use in many categories is really AI. There are some things that are not, but there's a lot of AI that we've been using for the last few years. We just haven't been calling it AI. And now we are. Okay, so I've got my image. Any other questions before I'm going to show you how I create the image for competition? So this right now, I need to save this file first. And I'm going to say save. And I can do save as if I wanted to keep this image exactly the way it was. But I don't have to do that because when I did the denoise, it created this file up here. Enhanced NR DNG, noise reduction is the NR. So I'm going to do file. And let's do save as just to make sure. And I always save my files as a TIFF. If I save them as a Photoshop file, it's going to give me a Photoshop icon and not the image itself in these thumbnails. And I want to see the thumbnail. And the TIFF has every feature of the Photoshop capability built into it. It's 16 million colors, it's et cetera, et cetera. So a TIFF is the easiest thing for me to work with. So now it's creating this TIFF. I'm going to say save and OK. And if you look up here, now it's a TIFF. And now that it's a TIFF, I'm going to change it to, I'm going to say image size. So I'm going to go with the sizes that the competition asks for. And by the way, in talking with people, a lot of people don't follow the rules of sizing for competition, by the way. They submit JPEGs because it won't let you do anything else. But it will let you submit larger files than what the specs are. But the specs are in pixels. And the specs are, and by the way, I have to click this just so that it makes it proportional. That's what this little link does. So 1920 by 1200. So I'm technically out of spec because it's 1244, but that's okay. I'm going to say okay. And why is it okay? I'll show you in a second. So we'll say okay, it's going to convert it. Okay, now it's 1920 wide. And by the way, in Photoshop, you can always see what you're doing by clicking on these rulers. Right now, the ruler's in inches, but I can change it to pixels. And now that you can see it's slightly over the 1900, so it's 1920. And what I'm going to do is I am going to make it to spec. So I'm going to come down, and this little mark in the lower left-hand corner is 1200. And so I'm going to select it and crop it. And now my image size Oh, it says 1204. But that's close enough for me. So I'm within the range of what the competition wants. And then I say, okay, now that I've got it small like this, relatively small to what it was, it's about half the size it was. I'm going to say file, save a copy, and this will be my, and I typically put the name that I'm going to use. I'll say ballerina. I spelled that wrong. I'll say ballerina fly. That was a good adjective, Betty. I'll say ballerina fly, and competition will not take TIFFs. So if I click over here, it gives me lots of choices of file types to save it in. And by the way, that's a huge advantage of Photoshop. Everybody all the social media people love this because they can pick all different types of formats, and certain websites only accept certain types of files. So anyway, I'm going to save it as a ballerina fly JPEG, and I'm going to also call it 1920 so that I'll remember that that's competition size. And then I'll save it. And by the way, it'll bring up this options of JPEGs. And I don't know if, does Lightroom let you have options on JPEGs? Anybody know?
Yeah, yeah, it does let you resize it down, if that's what you're asking. And
But-
yeah, the quality also, it lets you specify the quality.
So I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Is that it does have quality
Yes,
choices? Okay,
yeah, you can specify quality.
okay. And I don't use progressive, by the way, so I just use baseline, and that's the standard. And optimized, if I was using on the web, I would use the optimized, baseline optimized. And I'll just say, okay. And now my file is back in my originals. And since I called it ballerina something, it's going to be in with ones that are called ballerina. You can see I've done a few things with ballerina. So I'm looking for where is she? Oh, ballerina. Huh. Well, I wasn't paying attention where it saved it, so I can always go back to Photoshop and do file, save as. And it says was saving it in here. Well, it should be in here. And I don't,
Yeah.
It doesn't show you where you saved it, like to your desktop, to your,
well,
It shows that
it does when you do file save as, it'll take you to wherever the last file was saved. And should be right here.
yeah, I think you've got file type as TIFF. So is it showing only TIFF files? If you change it to JPEG, will it show you the JPEG files?
I'm sorry, yes. That's why. defaulted to TIFFs. And so my ballerina fly is right here. So now I'll go back and show you if it'll let me do this. I'm going to go back and open up the original file, which is I'm in JPEGs. So I'm going to look at raw files. Huh. I want to look at actually all files. But it must be because I was trying to save as, so I'm going to get out of here. And I'll go back to actually, I'll open up my files over here or down here. Okay, so this is my original file. And now we can see them side by side. If I make this one a little smaller. Gotta move those guys. Okay. That's my original file. You can see how it's sharper on the left with the revised file. There's no pole, which is critical. And the background's blended and put together pretty nicely. And that takes you through. So tell me, was that too much all in one session? Because I used a lot of tools and I created a lot of effects.
No, it's great. Just take notes as we go along.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Thank you.
I could also, and next time I might do this, is just concentrate on one tool where I'll pick an image where I need to do a lot of cloning, or I'll do a lot of generative fill, or whatever the effect is. And then I'll spend most of my time on that so that when you're doing it on your own, you can practice and work your way through it. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is just so helpful.
I hope so.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I had a question about the files that you generated, the JPEG.
Yes.
Sometimes when I do that, I notice that that is not as sharp as the original image. Kind of wondering if
Well, definitely is going to be a lot less pixels. So let me just let me get rid of this. So that's the TIFF right there.
mhm.
Then I'll open up I'll bring in the JPEG and put them side by side so you can see them. They're down, the JPEG's down here. Where are you? Oh, here it is. Okay, so I'm going to drag in fly. Oh, you know what I need to do? I'm gonna escape. I'm gonna get rid of that. I need to go back so I can go into my history and go back before I cropped it and before I changed the image size. All right. So what I want to show is that's the TIFF in the enhanced high resolution. And then I'm going to file and I'm going to do open and I'll get the JPEG down here. Okay, here she is. All right. Now what you can do in Photoshop, I don't know if people understand this, but that's my original image. It's up here. It's the TIFF. This is the JPEG, and I can just pull that in and put it next to it. So now let's look at it. I'm going to blow it up. And then I'll blow up this one and move them so we can see them close to each other. So you can see that the JPEG, even though it was made from this file, it's a little softer than this one. Can you see that, Anar?
Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
It's always going to be softer
Okay.
because it has less pixels. So
Mm,
so you don't get to have your perfect file that you can see on your computer. And
mhm.
here's the biggest reason for that is that projectors, we have a expensive high-end projector for the club, but it can only use 1920 pixels. If you gave it a bigger file, it might be able to take it, but it's going to reduce it to 1920 pixels wide. It's not going to, it'll just show, it'll make up its own version of it. So it's better of you to make your own version of the 1920 size. So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
okay. If there's any more questions, we'll take them. If not, we are done for this evening.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Take care.
It was a big help, Eric. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Boyd.
And I did hear you in the beginning.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I couldn't hear anybody talking back to me, so I had to reboot
I
my,
was trying to send you a chat through that.
oh,
but
yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Eric.
Thanks
All right.
again.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.